Hello.
Hey,
Hey, how you doing?
good. How are you?
Good. Oh, you're outdoors. That's
Yeah.
lovely.
What's that?
That's so nice and
I
wholesome.
know. Yeah, it's a nice day. I was like already out here and I was like, oh, maybe I could actually just do this outside, you know?
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I went to the park earlier. I lay in the grass and looked at the sky. It was great. Um, I
Yeah.
went, I didn't do that more. Uh,
Yeah, I spend a lot of time outside in the backyard. I feel like it's I kind of can't wait once it starts to get warm. Like I feel like my reading game goes way up because I can just sort
oh
of
yeah.
like sit outside and read, which is nice. Um yeah, are
Remind
you
me where you live. I know it's upstate, but I don't remember where.
Mount Kisco? It's like an
Oh
hour
yeah.
from the city, yeah. Um, I'm gonna go get some water real quick.
Sure.
How's your day? You've done you've done these like salons before?
Yeah. So basically, I have this sort of like it's unofficially the Tara show
Yeah.
within Intellect, which basically means I just get to pick whoever I like
Mhm.
and have them on, and I have a platform for it, and it's cool.
Yeah.
It's sort of a double life, which is to say there will be people on the Zoom. Sometimes it's smaller, sometimes bigger, but a lot of members also watch them on YouTube's asynchronously.
Okay.
So there's a sort of second life of people watching the videos to the point where I think this is Intellect is increasingly moving towards a like almost like C-SPAN model of having its own channel for people to tune in and out of. So
Mhm.
it's cool. I don't know. Did you ever meet Anna?
I don't think so. I
Oh,
think, yeah, I don't think, I think I first learned about them when you were doing that panel with, right? You on with Joey Keegan, or didn't you?
uh, I did with yeah with Zach. I did one with Zach
And
a
Zachary did.
couple weeks
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, Zach Davis. Yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of people in the sort of Christian writing world are doing things with and through Intellect, even though Anna is very much not I mean, not a fan of religion, really.
yeah.
But I think a lot of
Not
sort of
yet.
intellect, yeah, there's time, we're working
Not
on it.
yet. Yeah, yeah. There's definitely some energy there, I feel like with maybe we've talked about this, but I've been really sort of delighted with how I did a reading the other night and there was like a dinner afterward and I realized that like the majority of the people there was maybe 15, well maybe not the majority, but like 15 people at the dinner and sort of just like at least six were Christian, like people I didn't even know were sort of like, and it was like not at all branded as like a any kind of Christian event or anything like that. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm definitely I'm noticing it more and more, but I don't know if I'm just in very specific like social circles now where,
Yeah.
um
It could very well be the case that's what's happening with me too.
but who knows? Yeah, I've got my next sort of fiction-y thing. I'm going to Santa Fe in August, and I'm definitely curious, like whether whoever invited me, whoever else they would also invite, like if this is also going to be some kind of crossover thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's the way. So we'll sort of no one's in the waiting room just yet. We'll give it some time. People trickle in.
Yeah, 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 no
Uh,
problem.
but
Even if it's just us, that's fine. YouTube is good. I'm glad that it's being recorded for YouTube because then people can watch it. So
oh, excellent. Yeah, I mean it most people end up watching later on anyway. So, but it's nice to have it some people in because people ask really good questions. The membership are really invested. Like you see the same people come. I think a lot of people are tech workers who are also digital nomads and therefore this is their primary social connection. But it does mean that you get someone like dialing in from Dubai at 2 a.m. or
yeah.
dialing in between meetings. It's a really yeah, interesting group of people and they are uh really there's like one couple that come to everything. And there's like two of them on the screen and they're very sweet. So
How did you get plugged in with it?
so I appeared on a guest of someone else's panel. And then Anna came to New York last August, and we hung out a couple of times. Then she's like, "Do you want to be paid to bring people on and talk to them?" And I'm like, there must be a catch. This is clearly too good to be true.
Yeah,
But no, this is in fact the job. So
that's great.
yeah, how is writing, life, etc. going? You were just received into the Orthodox Church as
Yeah,
well?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like last Sunday, or I guess like 2 Sundays ago. Yeah. Um,
Congrats.
which has been good. Yeah, which is I'm still sort of processing it. I still kind of can't believe uh that we did it, you know. So yeah, so that was that's been good. And the writing has been okay. We've been like Nicolette's book just came out, and so we did
Hey,
like a short tour for it. And then she's in Slovakia now visiting family, and I'm going out there in like a week and a half or something to visit too. And so like all the traveling and just the logistics of all that stuff has kind of like thrown me off my game a little bit. But it's gone fine, you know.
fine is so much better than terrible, which is how it often goes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit of a masochist. It's always I feel like fine or good. You know what I mean? At this point, I'm kind of used to the struggle, and I kind of like it. So, you know.
No,
Oh, oh,
hello,
Reagan.
hello, Reagan. So we'll keep on vamping and chatting as people trickle in for another 5 or so minutes. But no, I definitely am a I either love writing or deeply, deeply hate it.
Yeah,
Right now I'm working sort of, I won't say half-heartedly on a novel. It's not quite what I mean, but I'm working on a novel that is in such early stages that I know that absolutely nothing I do will make it even into the first final first draft, let
yeah,
alone a final draft.
yeah,
And so it still feels like I'm just sort of playing with the sandbox rather than actually writing a book.
yeah.
Although have you what do you I've been writing on a Remarkable, and this has been life-changing.
Oh yeah, yeah. I have a remarkable.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, it's amazing. The little keyboard and the
you know,
do you use the
I,
keyboard or you just use the handwriting?
I don't have the keyboard, and I kind of only use it for reading, like
Ah,
PDFs and stuff. But I've kind of soured on it. I was a very big public promoter of the Remarkable, and then mine. How long have you had yours for?
a month
So yeah,
on
yeah.
Bird Seal.
Well, yeah. Well, mine and Nicolette's both stopped working,
Oh,
and so and then which I guess it's not that hard. Just been lazy about getting it replaced or whatever.
but what
Um,
happened?
hers wouldn't turn on, and then mine would stop syncing with the app or whatever. But you've got some months left.
All right, good to know. It was a bit
Yeah,
expensive,
yeah,
so I do hope it lasts. Uh,
yeah,
or I will be very annoyed. But
yeah.
I use the keyboard, so it's I used to write with an Alpha Smart when I was a teenager, and
Okay.
that's just it's the same thing like portable typewriter, but that doesn't have much of a screen and it doesn't sync. So
Right.
it does I have the sort of romantic sense that I am writing on a portable typewriter when I'm typing on it.
Yeah.
But I also can't see how many words I've written, which is an interesting kind. I'm so used to the little number at the bottom of the
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah.
Hello, Reagan, by the way. Feel
Yeah.
free if you would like to introduce
Yeah.
yourself, where you're dialing in from, but no obligation otherwise. Uh,
Right. You might be the only one. We're gonna have this.
that's
Uh
all right.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
sorry.
One second. Kevin, hey, come on, boy.
Oh, we're getting an animal of some kind.
Yeah. Yeah. My dog's here.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's get started. Thank you, first of all, Jordan, so much for being here. I'm delighted. So, for those of you in the Zoom or who will be watching via YouTube, welcome to Interintellect. We are an online and sometimes offline discussion and video platform for talking about ideas. This will be recorded, so perhaps if you're if they're watching on YouTube, I feel like they know that already. So I am delighted to have with me today Jordan Castro, author of The Novelist, a novel, which I have read and really, really loved. And I've been a fan of some of your sort of non-fiction work for a while. I've loved talking to you in other panels. And I particularly enjoyed The Novelist, both as a book and as a kind of exploration of a certain kind of specificity that I really enjoy as a writer, enjoy as a reader, where the weird stuff of life kind of gets illuminated into something that is both greater and the same as what it actually is. And the novelist did that for me, so I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
But so I guess I actually want to start by asking a couple more general questions about your approach to writing and particularly the idea of quote unquote auto fiction. When you consider yourself as a writer or think of your relationship to work, was the idea of kind of working intimately with sort of characters based on your own life or a sense of what quote unquote auto fiction is meant to be part of your original approach to writing or something that came to you in the process of writing?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks for the nice introduction. And yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think when I was younger, um, that was sort of writing about myself. I mean, I came up online, so I started publishing when I was like 16 in like online literary journals. And I think my writing had was for a long time kind of intimately tied up with my own life, with like blogging and posting and that kind of thing. And a lot of the writers that I liked seemed to write to draw from their own life too. Um, but I think one of the things that was interesting is like I had this idea when I was younger that like writing about my life would have some sort of, if not like salvific effect, that it would have some sort of that it would be able to help me. You know what I mean? It was almost this kind of like tortured therapeutic mode where I was like, if I just understand what's going on with me, or if I just sort of look at myself, one of my uh friends and I had like a joke about like a potential Beckett play where like called The Within, a Beckett type play where it's just some guy walking down like a dark hall, and he gets to the end after like a year and it's like wrong direction, you know what I mean? And I feel like that was sort of my experience with writing in a kind of myopic sort of way. I thought that it would have this effect on my life and it just didn't. And so there was a period where I felt sort of let down by that. And I think with the novelist, I was kind of trying to like it was partly based on my own life and my own experience, but I also kind of wanted to like uh, take a look at sort of zoom out and sort of take a look at at the autofiction project overall and kind of critique it. The writer Dean Kissick called it meta anti autofiction, which I appreciated.
And what point does fiction come in for you? Or the like, there is that sort of incredible dizzying power that one has as a novelist where, halfway through the novel, you could just have a spaceship crash through the house or what have you. Anything could happen.
Hmm.
Um, how does sort of the interplay of what you're free to write or what you're free to invent versus the quote unquote truth or the seeming truth or the sort of specificity of details that how do you decide this is the moment that I'm going to sort of make a creative decision that is from from without rather than sort of organizing from within?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it sort of emerges, I think, semi-consciously. You know what I mean? For me, and I think sometimes the subject matter kind of just, my second novel that's coming out next year, isn't based on my life like at all. And I think sort of the subject matter I was dealing with, the themes I was dealing with, all sort of just lent themselves better to like a more fictional thing. But I think really when I'm writing, I mean, it's not it's all fiction. You know what I mean? I'm always making decisions based on sort of like literary aesthetic values and things like that. You know what I mean? So I'm never trying to just be like totally accurate or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
and so but I don't know at least in the beginning stages I'm not sure what I'm not really sure what happens. Yeah.
Do you find, I'm curious, that sort of you talk about as just now sort of particular values or a particular system. Do you have a clear sense in your own mind of like what you're working toward in as a novelist, or what sort of a good novel is or ought to be, and has that changed in the course of your own writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think at first, no. Like at first, I like to write and just see what emerges. I mean, I think like normally for first drafts, it's sort of a process of like seeing where it takes me, and then eventually reading what's there and trying to understand what's there, you know. And so certain themes become crystallized in the editing process, or whatever. Um, but I don't sort of set out with like a you know, some sort of like ideological or like a propaganda type like goal. Here's the message that I want to communicate or something like that. Um and so yeah, and I mean I you know, I mean there are I'm always sort of thinking about you know, what novels can do uniquely well, you know, like when I'm writing. And so I think like for me, all of my favorite novels deal in some way with sort of portraying like a specific texture of consciousness or something like that. There's a Thomas Bernhard has a line about how like I can't remember it. I'll probably butcher it, but it's something like the only interesting thing about literature, you know, are invisible processes which no one can see, or something like that. And I think literature has this unique capability to kind of like illuminate or sort of get into the, yeah, those invisible, the sort of particular movements of a specific mind or soul or something like that. And so that's generally kind of the mode that I like to work in. Yeah.
And one of the things that I kind of love so much about the novelist is a kind of a painful specificity in writing about the internet and in writing about distraction that is also not, I mean, I think it's easy to talk about the internet as mindless distraction. You know, we're just sort of blindly giving ourselves over to some dopamine hit. And something that I think you capture really well is that the act of all of the little sort of mental rabbit holes we do go down in being distracted by the internet are simultaneously like they're more interesting than just our eyes are glazing over and we're zoning out. And they're also kind of more disturbing. It's like, you know, in some ways, like a novelist, like a glimpse into like every sin a person could commit inside their own head, in terms of, you know, pride or jealousy and I'm curious, uh, how about your own relationship to the internet, and whether where in the process of writing the novelist the internet kind of emerged as this sort of canvas of the soul,
Yeah.
where you can play with these different emotional and kind of, I think, spiritual states.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it emerged sort of right away. I had been trying to write, I'd been sort of trying and failing. 1 second. Come on, Kev. I'd been sort of trying and failing to write. Hold on, I'm putting my dog inside. I've been trying and failing to write like another novel and getting distracted by the internet. And I think it started with a sort of like effort to kind of actually see what was going on when I was getting distracted, you know, like I would find myself you know, I would like come to almost, you know, 5 minutes would be gone and I'd be like in the middle of looking at some tweet or something like that. And so I tried to sort of like, you map the mechanics of what was actually going on. And I think, I mean, a couple of things happened. I mean, one was that I realized that that was actually kind of like a propulsive device, you know, like the sort of actions. There's actually a lot of actions that take place when you're just sort of clicking around, you know, and so that sort of gave the novel a kind of like propulsion or whatever. But but yeah, and then I mean the other part of it is like I really like Victor Shklovsky's idea of defamiliarization, you know, this idea that sort of um you know, literature can kind of like make something strange or uh you know, I feel like we go, especially with the internet, you know, but it's like we go about our lives and kind of stop seeing things kind of semi-consciously or unconsciously sometimes, you know. My friend Michael Clune uses this example of like, you know, when you get a new car, you sort of see maybe the black is this deep black, and you can kind of notice all of the specifics of the car or whatever. But after like a week, and especially after like a year of having the car, you really just it becomes invisible, you know? And so I was trying to sort of, and so I think something similar happens with like things like making coffee, which is in the Novelist, or using the internet, or any of these kind of mundane details. And I think there's actually a lot there that that's sort of interesting, especially when you just sort of pay attention.
I mean, it was something that really struck me. I think before I was familiar with the novelist, I think that I was aware of your work a little, and I remember talking to Stephen Adubato, and he's like, "There's a scene where somebody poops," and I
Uh,
had a kind of preconceived sense of like that this was a sort of Bataille-esque transgressive
yeah,
approach to pooping.
right.
Just not having read the book yet, and then reading it, and kind of finding actually that it was not, or at least it did not come across to me as a kind of sort of what we're going to transgressively talk about shit, as much as making these sort of very human processes, these very human kind of parts of our lives and animal parts of our lives, familiar in a way that unfamiliar, excuse me. I mean, maybe beautiful is pushing it, but certainly like
Yeah.
worthy of our attention. And I thought it was interesting later to talk. I read one of your interviews where you talk about using the word pooping rather than the word shitting. And the kind of difference in what that actually does for the reader. And I would love you to expand on on this particular scene and on how to treat something kind of potentially scatological without how you manage to not do the kind of transgression for transgression's sake, even in a while writing about something that is kind of intimate and shameful or
Yeah.
considered.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, part of it might just be that I legitimately wasn't trying to be transgressive or
Yeah.
transgressive. Like I was a little bit aware. I mean, I was aware of my editor, and was like, this is what people are going to focus on. We have to cut this down, and stuff like that. But to me, like, it very quickly, as I was working on it, and kind of, I was trying to just treat it like other things. You know what I mean? And not um uh yeah, I mean, I just legitimately wasn't trying to transgress like that, and so maybe that came across. I mean, I was like, one of my I like this novel, My Dog Tulip by J.R. Ackerley. Have you heard of it?
I haven't read it, but I like have seen it on a shelf.
It's pretty great, the novel is about, or maybe it's a memoir. I hope it's a novel, but it might be a memoir. But a huge chunk of it is him trying to get his dog to like mate with another dog. And it sort of seems like he has some, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, there's this very almost clinical, sort of scientific way that he goes about writing about these things that are kind of like animalistic or grotesque or bizarre. And I was just sort of trying to write about it in a way that was truthful also, because a lot of the time when people write about sort of transgressive scatological things, that's just not how one actually goes about their daily business or whatever. It's sort of this like fake kind of like pompous sort of like weird posturing. Otessa Moshfegh has some. I read some interviews where she's like writing about it, and so like I want to reclaim the kind of like dark spiritual quality of whatever, and it's just like disgusting. You know what I mean? I'm never doing it again though, because people ask me about it, and I don't really have a good answer, yeah.
Fair enough. Yes, not to feel like I have to ask you that question. But
No, no,
I am,
you're good.
yeah,
You're good.
I am. I guess this is the idea of as a writer, one of the things that I am really interested in insofar as I have a mental manifesto that is sort of incomplete in my head. I know it has something to do with attention, and I kind of always come back to the sort of Simone Weil quote about attention being a form of love. And what is really interests me about the novels is it is a book in some ways about attention, or about where our attention goes and goes away from and goes towards. And I'm curious about your own relationship to attention, both as a writer and as someone whose attention is like as a writer for whom attention is an act, part of the act of writing, and also as a writer about attention in
Mhm.
writing the novelist. Is it something that you find natural? Is it something you struggle with? Is it something that kind of you cultivate and how do you cultivate it if so?
That's a good question. I mean, part of it is that I think, especially with the novelist, I think just because of growing up online, like I have just had the experience of like a sort of fractured, fragmented attention from like a very young age, you know? And so like for better or for worse, kind of like clicking around and scrolling and stuff has just become a part of the texture of my mind, you know? And I think like but I mean, I don't know. I mean, I part of I mean, I can lock in for long periods, and part of that includes like prayer helps, meditation. Um, but really prayer, I think, has a kind of centering, orienting power that like stretches out into my life beyond that, you know? And so, I mean, that really is kind of where uh, any sort of successful attempt at like sustained attention is like born, I think, for me. Kierkegaard talks about inwardness, you know, this sort of like um as like some sort of essential quality to creativity where in order to cultivate it you kind of have to sort of retreat from other people or from in this case the internet and kind of like commune with God or oneself. I mean, I'm not really sure. That feels weird to say commune with oneself, but you know, like that there's some sort of like way in which yeah, one has to sort of sit in silence or something in order to have like a well to draw from. Um and so yeah, there's that. I mean, also I don't know. I mean, we live like we have like trails in the backyard, and me and my wife Nicolette like to go for walks and stuff, and she's always like pointing out different things. And we have a game we play called that she invented called What's Changed, where we like go back there and like see what's changed, you know, stuff like that. And so I feel like I'm always trying to or finding yeah, it's there are like ways of cultivating attention to like oneself and one's surrounding, I think. But prayer for me is kind of the thing.
So this is the natural segue to me asking you about faith. I want to put a pin in it because I want to ask you one question before that.
Hmm.
Uh, but which is about, I mean, I'm watching you somewhat enviously from this tiny Manhattan apartment, looking at the trees behind you,
Talks
and
to someone
I'm
about a great no, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
I am curious about your relationship with sort of the city more broadly, or the sort of or nature more broadly. Do you think that there is a kind of uh necessity in being somewhere that is embedded in the natural world or is quiet in order to write for you? Or are those things sort of de decoupled? Could you also write in, I don't know, the middle of Manhattan?
I don't know. I've never lived there. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I mean, a part of me, I mean, I'm more afraid. I mean, part of the reason why I have never lived there and have never really lived. I mean, I lived on the west side of Cleveland for a while, but that's not really like a city, but like and I had a yard and was very close to the woods there too. But I mean, I part of you know, I don't know that it's so much the natural world or the busyness of the city or something, but it's more like I'm kind of uh afraid of the sort of like mimetic dynamics of like New York and other places, you know. I mean, I think it's not so much like the difference between like a busy street and like the woods, so much as just like being in such close proximity to like other people who are sort of doing something similar and always having a kind of like conversation about this person got this deal and this and that, like who was at this place. Like I actually am like incredibly sensitive to that. And so I think like it being sort of removed from some of those dynamics is good for me, you know. I mean, I love, I mean, we you know, and then there's like, I don't know, practical things like we have a dog who needs to run around and stuff like that. Um but yeah, I mean, I've always liked going for hikes and stuff, but I'm not sure to what degree that I don't know that it's necessary. I'm sure that if I lived in the city, I could write there too. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
But I'm struck by it only because the thing I struggle with is not so much the not having nature part, but the mimesis part, the sense of being, and this is actually something that I do also want to talk about in the novelist, both in terms of your use of Jordan Castro, the novelist character in the novelist, who's sort of also an online personality, but also the various relationships that your narrator has with other men and other writers. I don't remember if Gerard, you explicitly quote Gerard. I know you've mentioned him in an interview and sort of the mimetic theory of desire and its role in the novel. I'm curious how you sort of where you see the dangers of mimesis, both for you as a writer and as a subject, as sort of the natural subject of the novel in some ways.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I mean, there are all kinds of dangers associated with it, but I mean, I think one is, I mean, in some ways, mimesis is good and totally necessary for writing. I mean, I just wrote an essay about sort of my influences with the novelist, sort of tracking the different writers that I've sort of imitated over time. And I mean, that's like one of the things. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he wrote a book called The Mimetic Brain about mimetic theory applied to sort of like I think he was a psychologist. And Jean Michel something, I think. Anyway, but he talks about how sort of we learn to speak through mimesis, we learn to write through mimesis. It's sort of inherent to the creative act. And so in some ways it's a good thing, but I think when it comes to sort of interpersonal dynamics. People can do all kinds of things that aren't in line with any kind of like transcendent value or anything like that because they're like competing with the people around them or getting swept up in different in different dynamics and stuff that I think I'm just very sensitive to, envy, whatever, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And yeah, sorry.
Oh no, I was smiling only because I think like I don't know how much the do you feel like the pandemic was something that supercharged you in that way or some I mean from my perspective one of the things that the pandemic did was sort of I had a couple of years away from a certain kind of way of living mimetically in the industry part of the New York literary world, insofar as it is a world. And I like found myself incapable of going back in a way that was like going to a book party or an event felt to me so much sort of more stranger and almost inhuman because of the time that sort of had been spent away from it. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I know there's sort of another pathway that many people had in the pandemic, which is getting extremely online and sort of becoming even more enmeshed in not even discourse like third and fourth order discourses where everything was about the reaction to the thing, about the reaction to the thing, about the reaction to the thing. And I think which you sort of satirize quite on I forgot the word I was going to say. Well, we'll just say well, when in this sort of discourse about whatever the novelist Jordan Castro may or may not have said on the internet. Uh,
Mhm.
I'm curious whether you found as a very online person, uh, the which direction the pandemic took you in, mimetically speaking.
Um, I feel really fortunate in that, like, we, me and Nicolette kind of had a nice time during the pandemic. We had a yard and like a shed, and I actually sort of felt, I was, I guess right before the pandemic is sort of when I started to become a Christian. I think I was baptized during the pandemic, but I had a group of friends that would come over like once a week to do like a book club. And so I just felt like I don't know. I mean, I sort of felt grounded in real life during the pandemic. I know that wasn't many people's experiences. I mean, but I did have, I will say, I mean, there were some friends of mine who I had been friends with for a very long time, who seemed to really get swept up in a lot of the sort of political stuff going on at the time. And I did lose a couple of friends due to that, because in one case it was because I was not participating in certain mimetic dynamics, and to them this was sort of indicative of various moral shortcomings on my part or something like that, And so I was aware of it happening, and it did bother me when I would log on and see the kind of like feverish mode that people were getting in. Um, but I was fortunate insofar as I had things to counterbalance that. Yeah. And being aware of it too. I mean, just being aware of the sort of temptation of that or of those dynamics, I think helped to some extent to insulate me from it. Um, because I can start to see it crop up in myself. Someone tweets something and I'm suddenly writing some sort of like uncharitable response so that I can, you know what I mean, get other people to like jump on some sort of bandwagon. It's just but yeah, so I was sort of aware of it at the time, and I also had other things to kind of help insulate me from the excesses of it, I think.
I mean, I certainly my pandemic experience I think was quite a bit like yours, even in New York, insofar as it did feel like a kind of grounding in real life, so to speak.
Hmm.
But then again, so I think we've now gone to the part where I really do want to ask you about your journey to faith.
Mhm.
You baptized. I know you've spoken about being received into the Orthodox Church very recently. As much as you're comfortable, I'd love you to talk a little bit about what that journey looked like.
Yeah, so that's a big. I mean, I mean, when I growing up, I had like a very, I wasn't raised religious at all, and so like I'd never gone to church growing up. And I had had sort of like all of the kind of predictable hangups with it. Like I just thought it was sort of stupid, or that people who believed in God were kind of yeah, stupid. I mean, I kind of thought that it kind of got in the way of whatever political action. I mean, all of the kind of normal, young, egotistical, sort of secular hangups with religion. I had them. And then when I was like, but I'd also gotten as like a teenager and young adult, I just found myself trapped by certain like behavior, addictions and resentment and all this kind of stuff, um, that my worldview at the time couldn't I couldn't affect any behavioral change even when I wanted to. Like I just didn't have some sort of power in myself to change in a way that I knew I needed to change, could sort of intellectually understand that like I needed to change certain things about myself, and I just couldn't do it. And so a friend of mine, suggested that I start praying in a kind of very rudimentary way. He's like, worst case scenario, you're just talking to a wall. You don't even have to know what you're praying to. Just pray and ask for help, and then at night, say thank you. And I started doing that, and it started like changing my life. And so it started there. But then when me and Nicolette started dating, she had like right before we started dating, she had gone to church with her mom and had this sort of like overwhelming experience of the presence of God, is how she described it. Um, and at first I kind of thought it was maybe like a phase, or I just felt like sort of alienated by it. I kind of didn't understand what she was talking about. And because she had had like this kind of experience, she didn't exactly know how to articulate it to me in a way that I could understand either. And so at some point, like when I realized it wasn't going away for her, I started reading more about Christianity. Um, with a completely uncharitable uh intent. You know what I mean? But I started reading. I met some other Christians who started doing the book club with me. And it was kind of this gradual process of kind of chipping away. And at some point, there were just certain things that I saw that I was unable to unsee. I very much felt like it sort of happened to me. Like I did not want to become a Christian. I kind of thought my life would be over. I didn't even understand like why one would say I'm a Christian. You know what I mean? Like there was just so many fundamental things I just didn't really understand. Um, but yeah, it was a long process. William James talks about the educational variety of religious experience, and I feel like that's sort of what I had. It was this kind of long, years long, kind of gradual thing of yeah, reading, talking to other people, praying, and trying it on, and then and it and that's what yeah, yeah.
And was there something particular about the Orthodox Church that that sort of is that sort of Nicolette's background, or was that something you both sort of were
You
drawn?
know, yeah, it wasn't her background. I mean, we were, Protestant. I got baptized in like a small non-denominational church, and a lot of the people I was reading were Protestant. C.S. Lewis, Paul Tillich, Kierkegaard, people like that. The Orthodox Church, yeah, it's I almost hesitate to talk about Orthodoxy just because I'm so new. But it started, I think, as this problem of just like where to worship. I mean, we were moving around a bunch and it was like difficult to find a church to worship at. Like I mean, one of the things was that at the churches we were going to, especially the Protestant services where it would be like a pastor talking for 45 minutes,
Mhm.
it would like trig me out. Like I was, because my argumentative head would start, like, these different points of doctrine and whatever. And there were certain doctrinal things that having to do with like penal substitution that I really couldn't get on board with. And so there were some theological issues I was having with certain with certain denominational things. But but we had a friend who was Orthodox, and one of Nicolette's professors at Yale was a deacon. Now he's a priest, and he's the one that took us through catechesis. But they suggested we go, and I noticed that the liturgy was sort of the first experience after like, years and years of going to church every Sunday. It was like the first experience I had where I felt able to kind of like uh where I wasn't arguing. You know what I mean? It wasn't kind of activating my argumentative instincts, and I could kind of like pray and meditate and just kind of enter into something that felt it just felt different than anything I'd ever experienced. And then there are theological things that I like about it and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of it. Yeah.
Do you feel that there's a kind of not that a sort of a Christian writer in terms of like a marketing or ideological way, do you think that there are either particular aesthetic commitments or moral commitments that a writer who's also a Christian has to like has in approaching their work, or do you think or not?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I mean, it's a complicated. I mean, one of the things C.S. Lewis has an essay about, it might just be called Christianity and Literature. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It sounds familiar.
I think I can't remember the title, but he has this sort of analogy where he says that, he uses the analogy of cooking. And he says that like if a Christian is making, I don't remember what example, you'll say stew. If a Christian is making a stew and a pagan is making a stew, they'll still need salt, they'll still need the meat, they'll still need the potatoes, they'll still have to basically use the same materials. You know what I mean? And the qualities that would make it a good stew are like the same whether you're a pagan or a Christian. But which is interesting, and I think that's true on some level. And he kind of goes further where he kind of talks about the material productions of the stew, where he's like, but maybe if you were getting the meat from, I don't think he uses the word factory farm, I don't know, but like if there was like a lot of exploitation involved in the whatever getting these things, maybe it would be like less Christian or whatever. Um, but I do think, I mean, yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about it. I mean, there's a way I think that people can get, I mean, yeah, I mean, I mean, I think, what am I think that, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of all the ways it can go wrong. Uh, when I looked up the top selling Christian fiction on Amazon, there was a book called The Lost Bookshop or The Last Bookshop. And like in the subtitle, it was like the most cheering and uplifting book of 2024, like perfect for gifts. And then all the reviews were like, I could imagine this a Netflix series. Like this is perfect for escape. And there's all this kind of like, there's all these ways in which I think that like when people are trying to be um to sort of superimpose their Christianity on the work, I think it can get kind of it can lose a certain kind of like artistic value or something. So I try not to be like ideological about it or too But yeah, I mean, I think like, I wouldn't want to write a novel that like sort of makes sin seem seductive or something like that. And so yeah, yeah. Does that answer the question? That's yeah.
I mean, it's insofar as it is an answerable question,
Yeah.
yes. But it's certainly something that I'm very sort of conscious of, which
Mhm.
is the sense of like not wanting to impose some kind of external ideology on the work or to kind of turn a work into a kind of propagandistic, and the good lesson at the end is that, we love Jesus. And yet
Right.
at the same time, I think like if you do have a moral metaphysical approach to the world, that also kind of everything gets encompassed
Yes.
in it,
Right.
including the question of like, what is art for anyway? Like art,
Yeah.
if we are pursuing artistic transcendence, that's sort of in dialogue with this other transcendence that, potentially suffuses the entire universe. And then the question becomes like almost, I feel like there's one way of talking about the relationship between faith and art that's like, well, great art is like this, and here are the limitations that Christians have in like being able to try and do great art because they can't do that, this thing, and they can't use this technique, and they can't use this sort of gaze. But I think another way that I've sort of been working and wrestling with it in my own mind is like, what is this for? What is the transcendence? Like, what is the great art, and is the greatness of great art sort of bound up with something true? And if so, that also impacts my approach to it.
Mhm.
Uh, but I guess I think it is one of those sort of unanswerable questions.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think too, like art, at least for me, like, my work emerges sort of semi-consciously and it's sort of born of like the texture of one's kind of like spirit or thoughts, or it's kind of inextricable from the consciousness or the spiritual state of the person writing. And I think like, I mean, Nicolette did a great job in Bitterwater Opera, I think, of writing like basically a conversion narrative in a way that there was a review of it that came out in the Whitney Review, where the author was like clearly seething that it was like sort of unabashedly Christian, but still couldn't deny the kind of like aesthetic beauty or power of it, which I
Hmm.
thought was very interesting. And I mean, there's also this way I think where the there's a way in which I think a lot of art that I love, good art or whatever, sort of like surprises you. And I think sometimes when, going into something with too much of like a goal or like a message can sort of flatten or eliminate um a certain kind of like surprise or a certain kind of, like writing that sort of teaches you how to read it as you read it or whatever. And I think I'm sometimes I love this George MacDonald quote where he says that Jesus didn't come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people alive. And there's this way in which I think like when I think about morality in fiction or something like that, I sometimes think about how the novel deals with the stuff of life, just like the Bible does. The Bible has incest and murder and all this stuff. And it runs the and slavery, and it runs the risk. I mean, one of the it runs the risk of being seen as endorsing that.
Hmm.
And I think like certain novel, like some of the greatest Christian novels like Dostoevsky and so on are about like psycho murderers and all this kind of stuff. And I think like so I don't think a Christian should shy away from the darker aspects of reality. That's part of what compelled me to Christianity, is that it has this very realistic and sobering view of like what people are capable of. And it kind of like illuminates that. And so yeah, so I don't think it has to Christian literature or great art. Like I think I don't really feel limited as a Christian whatsoever. I
Hmm.
almost feel free. You know what I mean? In a lot of ways, I feel like it freed me up. So yeah.
So I know we've talked about this before in other venues. We were on a panel together in January. But I'm curious about, so as faith has become sort of, let's say, mimetically resurgent among younger people, at least in some of the sort of intellectual discursive circles that you and I both run in. Um, how does that like, how do we navigate, or what does it mean to navigate kind of I mean, or let me frame it as a personal story about
Yeah.
my, so that to give you sort of the chance to respond your own way. Uh, it was strange as someone who had like reconverted slash converted slightly before that, uh, to kind of there was a time when the act of conversion felt for me like an escape from discourse of a certain kind. That this was like the world of Twitter and memes was there, and reality was over here. And of course, as we've said, like the pandemic kind of intensified that. And then to kind of re-enter uh conversational spaces and places of mimetic terror where suddenly on the one hand, great, we're talking about this thing that's I think is really important and good, and yet at the same time, there at least I found it somewhat destabilizing of like, oh, is this just the cool thing now? And I'm curious how one holds on to maybe the reality of anything, uh, especially something this sort of significant. And how does one take it seriously as a writer without having that voice in the back of your mind going, well, all the young writers now are Christians, and like I hear that sells, or whatever that little voice in our heads that takes us away from reality and into some kind of uh the bad part of imitation rather than the kind of loving or open version
Mm.
of imitation.
Say more about, yeah. So what exactly, yeah, tell me more about what you're struggling with about it.
So
How do, yeah.
I think in the idea that something as intimate as faith could also be part of a kind of public, I won't say fad because that perhaps is too light, but that as faith is becoming something that has a bit of a resurgence, how does one kind of be a Christian author or be an author who is a Christian and avoid the siren call of like all the cool kids are doing it, and it's cool to be Catholic now, and this is part of a personal branding exercise. And I think this ties into kind of another attention that is broader, which is how do you love anything and not have it turn into a New Yorker tote bag on your arm?
Yeah.
Uh, but I think particularly with something that is, for me at least, was my escape route out of the world of mimetic desire and or what felt like mimetic desire and the world of New Yorker tote bags was faith.
Mhm.
And yet at the same time, I think maybe the question is just how do you love something and not let it be turned into a source of self-branding, or do we just accept that this is what we do as sort of storytelling beings and animal beings, and that we're always going to be trying to share the things about ourselves in an imperfect or sinful way?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I remember when there were all these sort of ridiculous think pieces about the sort of like trad cath trend in New York. And I was always like, where are they? Like, are they just talking about like, a couple of my friends? It seemed like for a while they were just talking about like one or two people and then and being like, there's this trend, you know what I mean? And but I, I mean, I can't I guess I personally was then and remain sort of optimistic. I
Mhm.
mean, one thing is just that like I can only control sort of my own behavior and kind of do my own sort of thing. And so like whenever I write about it, I try and write about it like humbly and reverently and sort of honestly, in a way that is sort of yeah, true to me and thoughtful and stuff like that, I but I also understand. I mean, like uh I think that irony, for example, plays this weird role in people's lives where like in order to test out ideas that are totally disharmonious with your sense of self or with your milieu or something like that, often people will try them out in a sort of like joking way. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And part of it is like it's like a defense mechanism, like where they're maybe earnestly engaging with these ideas or with Christianity, but they're sort of like also afraid because they don't know how to think of themselves that way. Um and so I think like sometimes that's just a way that people try on new ideas and then they grow into them, you know what I mean? Or in other cases, I think people, are sort of, I mean, social media and sort of meme culture or whatever has a kind of like flattening effect where you see someone being like, I mean, it's even for me, like, you'll see people be like asking for prayers or something on Twitter, and it's right next to, maybe underneath there's a porn bot, and maybe it's like underneath the tweet there's someone posting some sort of some joke, and then there's you know what I mean, like everything's kind of like jammed together, and so the medium sort of flattens things, and this person might really be earnestly asking for prayers and struggling, but it has a weird, like, in seeing it has a kind of weird effect, and so it seems like a sort of tote baggy thing or whatever, or a bumper sticker or something. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like Christianity is growing in other parts of the world. I mean, I don't feel like it's growing in other parts of the world. And, sometimes people think that we live in a post-Christian world. We might be living in like a pre-Christian world. You know what I mean? And I think like it's fine if I also personally, I love that like there are people who are becoming Christian and having a relationship with Jesus, and I understand that will happen imperfectly, especially if you're a semi-public or a public figure. And I mean, I've known people who have like gotten into Christianity and then really become like who've really been changed by it, you know what I mean? And so I never want to sort of like look at someone else's experience or the way they express it and sort of assume the worst or something like that. Because it's really not for me to not just it's just not for me to judge, you know what I mean? And uh yeah. And I'm also grateful. I mean, it's like I thought when I became a Christian, my life was over, and my intellectual life was over, and whatever, and it's just turned out to be the total opposite. And so I'm you know yeah, yeah, I mean, and yeah, sorry, I could go on. I mean, there's always been like, whether it's online or whether it's just like, people being sort of like not fake Christian, but like, thinly Christian in like all throughout world history. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a part of the deal. Like, I don't know. Like, I just and so I just really care about, yeah, my relationship with God and the people in my life and stuff like that. And everything else will God will separate the wheat from the chaff. You know what I mean? I don't have to do it or stress about it.
It seems a extremely healthy way to go about it. Making me maybe if I moved to Mount Kisco, I
Yeah,
too
yeah, yeah.
about everything. So those are all the questions I have from my end. This is the part where we do open it up to Q&A. So Reagan, if you do have a question, feel free. This now would be the time. But if you do not, that is also okay. Um, I'll take that as a no. Jordan, thank you so much for coming on today. This will be shared widely on YouTube. Hope to see you in person in the city or elsewhere before too long.
Yeah.
Are you anywhere near Episcopus?
Episcopus. I don't know. I still don't really know anything about where I live.
Uh,
Like a town or something?
it is. It's where the Breeder is a Breederhof community there. I'm teaching
Oh,
a Plow Writers Weekend, or Plow Young Writers Weekend.
okay.
Is up there, and I did not know if I would be passing through Mount Kisco. Uh,
Well, look, if you are, you should come through. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
who knows? Who knows? But it was so lovely to talking to you.
Yeah, you too.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.